Chapter 1. The Invitation to Ashwick Manor. The letter arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning, its envelope thick and cream-coloured, the kind of stationery that spoke of old money and even older secrets. Miss Marple sat by the window of her cosy cottage in St. Mary Mead, her knitting needles clicking softly as she read the elegant script. Dear Miss Marple, it has been far too long since we last met. I find myself in need of your unique perspective on a matter of some delicacy. I would be delighted if you could join me at Ashwick Manor for a brief stay. The countryside air might do you good, and I assure you your presence would be most appreciated. Yours sincerely, Lady Beatrice Ashwick. Miss Marple set the letter down, her sharp blue eyes narrowing ever so slightly. She had met Lady Beatrice only once, years ago, at a garden party in London. The woman had been charming, yes, but there had been something else, a brittleness beneath the polished exterior. And now, an invitation out of the blue. Miss Marple's instincts tingled. The next day she found herself in a hired car, winding through the lush lanes of the English countryside. Ashwick Manor loomed into view, its ivy-clad walls and towering chimneys a testament to its grandeur and its neglect. The gardens were overgrown, the fountain dry, and the windows seemed to stare out like hollow eyes. A butler greeted her at the door, his expression as stiff as his starched collar. Miss Marple, welcome to Ashwick Manor. Lady Beatrice is expecting you in the drawing-room. The drawing-room was a cavern of faded opulence, its velvet drapes heavy with dust, and its furniture arranged with rigid precision. Lady Beatrice rose from her chair, her smile as polished as the silver tea set before her. Miss Marple, how kind of you to come, she said, her voice smooth but with a faint tremor. I trust your journey was pleasant? Quite pleasant, thank you, Miss Marple replied, her gaze sweeping the room. She noted the faint lines of strain around Lady Beatrice's eyes, the way her fingers twisted the lace handkerchief in her lap. Tea was served, and the conversation meandered through pleasantries. The weather, the state of the roads, the latest village gossip. But Miss Marple waited, her instincts telling her there was more to this visit than idle chatter. Finally, Lady Beatrice set her cup down with a soft clink. I suppose you're wondering why I've asked you here, she said, her tone shifting ever so slightly. Miss Marple smiled gently. I assumed it wasn't merely for the pleasure of my company. Lady Beatrice hesitated, her gaze flickering to the door as if ensuring they were alone. It's about the attic, she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. The locked attic. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. Locked? Yes. It's been sealed for over 20 years. No one has entered it since... well, since the incident. What incident? Miss Marple asked, her tone calm, but her mind already racing. Lady Beatrice's hands tightened around her handkerchief. It's not something I like to discuss, but recently strange things have been happening. Noises in the night, shadows where there shouldn't be. And then there's the key. The key? It went missing last week. The only key to the attic, and now I fear someone is trying to open it. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her knitting forgotten. And you'd like me to find out why? Lady Beatrice nodded, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the fear beneath. I don't know who else to turn to. You have a way of seeing what others miss. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with quiet determination. "Then I shall do my best to help, Lady Beatrice. But tell me, what exactly happened in that attic 20 years ago?" Lady Beatrice's face paled. "That," she said, "is a story for another time." Chapter 2. The eccentric host dinner at Ashwick Manor was an affair of faded elegance. The dining room, with its long mahogany table and crystal chandelier, seemed to echo with the whispers of past gatherings. Miss Marple took her seat beside Lady Beatrice, her sharp eyes noting the subtle dynamics of the household. The other guests were an eclectic mix. There was Dr. Percival Graves, a middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed beard, and a habit of adjusting his spectacles when nervous. Across the table sat Mrs. Eleanor Henshaw, a widow with a penchant for dramatic sighs, and a gaze that lingered a little too long on Lady Beatrice. Beside her was Mr. Thomas Ashwick, Lady Beatrice's nephew, a young man with a restless energy and a tendency to fidget with his cufflinks. The conversation began politely, with remarks about the unseasonably warm weather and the state of the local roads. But Miss Marple noticed the undercurrents, the way Dr. Graves avoided eye contact with Lady Beatrice, the way Mrs. Henshaw's voice tightened whenever the attic was mentioned, and the way Thomas Ashwick's laughter seemed just a little too forced. "Tell me, Miss Marple," Dr. Graves said, his tone carefully neutral, "what brings you to Ashwick Manor? It's not often we have visitors from St. Mary Mead." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Lady Beatrice was kind enough to invite me. I've always been fond of the countryside, and Ashwick Manor is such a unique place." "Unique indeed," Mrs. Henshaw murmured, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine-glass, "though I dare say it's not for everyone. Some find it rather unsettling." Lady Beatrice's smile faltered for a moment before she recovered. "Nonsense, Eleanor. Ashwick Manor is a home full of history and charm. Isn't that right, Thomas?" Thomas Ashwick started, as if pulled from his thoughts. "Oh, yes, absolutely. Though I must admit, even I find some parts of the house a bit mysterious." "Mysterious?" Miss Marple asked, her tone light, but her interest piqued. Thomas hesitated, glancing at his aunt. "Well, there's the attic for one. I've always wondered what's up there. But Aunt Beatrice won't let anyone near it." Lady Beatrice's smile tightened. "The attic is private, Thomas. Some things are best left undisturbed." The table fell silent for a moment, the clink of cutlery against china the only sound. Miss Marple observed the reactions. Dr. Graves's slight frown, Mrs. Henshaw's barely concealed smirk, and Thomas's restless shifting in his seat. After dinner, the group retired to the drawing-room for coffee. Miss Marple found herself seated beside Mrs. Henshaw, who leaned in conspiratorially. "You must think us quite the odd bunch," she said, her voice low. "Not at all," Miss Marple replied. "Every household has its quirks." Mrs. Henshaw chuckled, though there was little humour in it. "Quirks, yes, but Ashwick Manor has more than its share. Take the attic, for instance. Have you heard the stories?" "Only that it's been locked for 20 years, Miss Marple said, her tone carefully neutral. Mrs. Henshaw's eyes gleamed. "Oh, it's more than that. They say something terrible happened up there. Something no one likes to talk about." Before Miss Marple could respond, Lady Beatrice approached, her expression unreadable. "Eleanor, I hope you're not boring Miss Marple with your tales." "Not at all," Miss Marple said smoothly. "Mrs. Henshaw was just telling me about the history of the house. It's quite fascinating." Lady Beatrice's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure, but perhaps we should save the ghost stories for another time. Miss Marple must be tired after her journey." As Miss Marple retired to her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The corridor was dimly lit, the shadows seeming to shift as she walked. Just as she reached her door, she heard it, a faint creak, like the sound of a door opening. She turned, her heart quickening, but the hallway was empty. Then, from the direction of the attic, came a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. Chapter 3. The Locked Attic. The next morning, Miss Marple rose early, her mind still lingering on the whisper she had heard the night before. The manor was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavy, as if the house itself were holding its breath. She dressed carefully, her fingers pausing for a moment on the brooch at her collar, a small silver piece shaped like a rose. It had been a gift from her late husband, and she often found herself touching it when she needed to think. Breakfast was a subdued affair. Lady Beatrice was absent, and the other guests seemed content to eat in silence. Miss Marple took the opportunity to observe them more closely. Dr. Graves was engrossed in a newspaper, though his eyes didn't seem to be moving across the page. Mrs. Henshaw sipped her tea with an air of distraction, her gaze occasionally flickering toward the staircase. Thomas Ashwick, on the other hand, seemed unusually animated, his fingers drumming restlessly on the table. "Did anyone else hear anything unusual last night?" Miss Marple asked casually, stirring her tea. The question hung in the air for a moment before Thomas spoke. "Unusual? Like what?" "Oh, just a noise," Miss Marple said. "A whisper, perhaps. It's an old house, after all. These places do tend to creak and groan." Mrs. Henshaw set her teacup down with a sharp clink. "Whispers, you say? How peculiar." Dr. Graves looked up from his newspaper, his expression unreadable. "Old houses have a way of playing tricks on the mind. I wouldn't read too much into it, Miss Marple." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "But I've always found that even whispers can tell a story, if one listens closely enough." After breakfast, Miss Marple decided to explore the manor. She wandered through the grand hallways, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch her as she passed, their eyes following her with an almost lifelike intensity. She paused before one particularly striking painting, a young woman in a white dress, her expression serene, but her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. The plaque beneath it read, "Lady Margaret Ashwick, 1895–1923. "My aunt," a voice said behind her. Miss Marple turned to see Thomas Ashwick standing there, his hands in his pockets. "She was quite beautiful," Miss Marple said. Thomas nodded, his gaze fixed on the painting. "She died young. Tuberculosis, they say. But there are other stories." "Oh?" Miss Marple prompted. Thomas hesitated, then shook his head. "Never mind, it's just family gossip." Miss Marple didn't press him. Instead she asked, "Do you know much about the attic?" Thomas's expression darkened. "Not much. Aunt Beatrice never talks about it, but I've always wanted to see what's up there. When I was a boy, I tried to pick the lock, but she caught me and gave me a proper scolding. Curiosity is a natural thing. Miss Marple said. "Especially for a child." Thomas shrugged. "Maybe. But there's something about that attic. It's like it's watching you, even when the door's closed." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Have you ever asked your aunt why it's locked?" "Once," Thomas said. "She told me some things are better left in the past." As the day wore on, Miss Marple found herself drawn to the attic door. It was at the end of a narrow hallway on the 3rd floor. The wood warped with age and the lock rusted, but still firmly in place. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cold metal, and for a moment she thought she felt a faint vibration, as if something on the other side were stirring. Then, from behind her, came the sound of footsteps. Chapter 4. Whispers of the Past. Miss Marple turned sharply, her hand still resting on the cold metal of the attic lock. The footsteps halted, and for a moment there was only silence. Then, from the shadows of the hallway, emerged Dr. Percival Graves, his expression unreadable behind his spectacles. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice calm, but with an edge of curiosity. "I didn't expect to find you here." "Dr. Graves," Miss Marple replied, equally composed, "I was just exploring the house. It's such a fascinating place, don't you think?" He stepped closer, his gaze flickering to the attic door. "Fascinating, yes, but also unsettling. This part of the house, in particular, has a certain reputation." "Oh?" Miss Marple tilted her head slightly, her tone inviting further explanation. Dr. Graves hesitated, then sighed. "I suppose there's no harm in telling you. Lady Beatrice's sister, Lady Margaret, died under mysterious circumstances. Some say her spirit still lingers here, especially near the attic." Miss Marple's eyes widened just enough to convey interest without alarm. "How tragic! And the attic, was it significant to her?" "It was her favourite place," Dr. Graves said, his voice lowering. "She spent hours up there painting and writing, but after her death, Lady Beatrice locked it up and forbade anyone from entering. It's been that way ever since." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "And the whispers I heard last night, do you think they could be connected?" Dr. Graves adjusted his spectacles, a nervous habit Miss Marple had noted earlier. "Whispers, you say? I wouldn't put much stock in such things. Old houses have a way of playing tricks on the mind." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone light but her mind racing. "Still, it's curious, don't you think? The way the past seems to linger in places like this." Dr. Graves didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced down the hallway, as if ensuring they were alone. "Miss Marple, if I may offer a word of advice, some doors are best left closed. The past has a way of unsettling the present." Before Miss Marple could reply, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple found herself in the library, a room filled with towering bookshelves and the faint scent of aged paper. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books, her mind still turning over Dr. Graves's words. As she pulled a volume from the shelf, a folded piece of paper fluttered to the floor. She picked it up and unfolded it carefully. It was a letter, the handwriting elegant but hurried, the ink faded with time. "Dearest Beatrice, I fear I have made a terrible mistake. The attic holds more than just my paintings. It holds a secret I can no longer bear to keep. If anything should happen to me, promise me you will protect it, protect him. Yours always, Margaret Miss Marple's breath caught. The letter was unsigned, but the name Margaret was unmistakable. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her pocket, her mind racing with possibilities. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with Mrs. Henshaw, who stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Miss Marple," Mrs. Henshaw said, her tone cool, "I didn't realize you were interested in literature." "Oh, I find books to be a wonderful escape," Miss Marple replied, her tone cheerful, "and sometimes they hold the most fascinating stories." Mrs. Henshaw's gaze lingered on the shelf where Miss Marple had found the letter. Indeed, though some stories are better left unread. Miss Marple smiled gently. "Perhaps, but I've always believed that the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is worth uncovering." Mrs. Henshaw didn't respond. Instead, she stepped aside, allowing Miss Marple to pass. But as Miss Marple walked down the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Henshaw's eyes were still on her. Chapter 6. The Midnight Shadow. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that seemed to press against the windows and doors of Ashwick Manor. Miss Marple sat by the small writing desk in her room, the letter from Lady Margaret spread out before her. The words "protect him" echoed in her mind, a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Who was him? And what secret was so terrible that Lady Margaret had felt the need to hide it in the attic? A soft creak from the hallway pulled her from her thoughts. She rose quietly, her sharp ears straining to identify the source. The sound came again, a faint rhythmic tapping, like footsteps moving cautiously. Miss Marple opened her door just enough to peer into the corridor. The hallway was dimly lit by the pale glow of the moon filtering through the windows. A shadow moved at the far end, near the staircase leading to the attic. Miss Marple's breath caught as she recognized the figure. It was Thomas Ashwick, his face tense and his movements hurried. He carried something small and metallic in his hand, glinting faintly in the moonlight. Miss Marple hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the hallway. She moved silently, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the carpet. Thomas disappeared up the staircase, and she followed, her heart pounding but her mind calm and focused. At the top of the stairs she paused. The attic door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible beyond it. She could hear Thomas inside, his breathing quick and uneven. "Thomas," she called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a sharp intake of breath, followed by the sound of something clattering to the floor. Miss Marple pushed the door open further and stepped inside. The attic was a jumble of forgotten things. Dust-covered furniture, stacks of old books, and trunks filled with who knows what. Thomas stood in the centre of the room, his face pale and his hands trembling. At his feet lay the missing pocket watch, its glass face cracked. "Miss Marple," he stammered, his voice unsteady. I can explain." "I'm sure you can," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but firm. "But perhaps you should start by telling me why you're here." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, his agitation evident. "I just wanted to know what was up here. Everyone's always talking about the attic, about the secrets it holds. I thought if I could find something, anything, it might explain why Aunt Beatrice is so determined to keep it locked." Miss Marple's gaze softened. And did you find anything? Thomas shook his head. No, just junk. Old paintings, letters, nothing important. Miss Marple stepped closer, her eyes scanning the room. Sometimes, Thomas, what seems unimportant can hold the key to everything. She bent to pick up the pocket watch, turning it over in her hands. The back was engraved with a date, 1923, the same year Lady Margaret had died. This watch, Miss Marple said slowly. It belonged to Lady Margaret, didn't it? Thomas nodded, his expression grim. Yes, Aunt Beatrice gave it to me when I turned 18. She said it was a family heirloom, but now I don't know what to think. Miss Marple's mind raced. The watch, the letter, the attic, it was all connected. But how? Before she could say more, a noise from the doorway made them both turn. Lady Beatrice stood there, her face a mask of fury. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice shaking with anger. Thomas flinched. "Aunt Beatrice, Enough!" Lady Beatrice's eyes blazed. "How dare you come up here? How dare you pry into things that don't concern you?" Miss Marple stepped forward, her tone calm but firm. "Lady Beatrice, perhaps it's time we talked about what's really going on here. The attic, the watch, Lady Margaret's letter. It's all connected, isn't it?" Lady Beatrice's composure cracked, her hands trembling as she clutched her handkerchief. "You don't understand. You can't understand." "Then help me understand," Miss Marple said gently. "Secrets have a way of festering, Lady Beatrice. Sometimes the only way to heal is to bring them into the light." For a long moment, Lady Beatrice said nothing. Then, with a shuddering breath, she nodded. "Very well. But not here, not now. Tomorrow, in the drawing-room. I'll tell you everything." Chapter 7. The Broken Key. The morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of the drawing-room, casting a soft glow over the assembled guests. Lady Beatrice sat stiffly in her chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Miss Marple, seated across from her, observed the woman's pale face and the faint tremor in her fingers. Dr. Graves, Mrs. Henshaw, and Thomas Ashwick stood nearby, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. "You said you would tell us everything," Miss Marple began, her tone gentle but firm. "It's time, Lady Beatrice. The truth cannot stay hidden forever." Lady Beatrice took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Very well, but understand this. What I am about to tell you will change everything. It is not a story I ever wished to share." She paused, as if gathering her courage, then began. 20 years ago, my sister Margaret fell in love with a man. He was not of our station, and my father forbade the match. But Margaret was headstrong. She continued to see him in secret, often meeting him in the attic, where she painted and wrote. It was her sanctuary. Miss Marple's eyes flickered to the pocket watch she had retrieved from the attic, now resting on the table between them. The date, 1923, seemed to pulse with significance. "One night," Lady Beatrice continued, her voice trembling, "Margaret came to me in tears. She was with child. She begged me to help her, to protect her from our father's wrath. I didn't know what to do. I was young, frightened. I told her to wait, to think carefully. But the next morning she was gone. The room was silent, the weight of Lady Beatrice's words hanging heavily in the air. "Gone?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lady Beatrice nodded. We searched for her, but she had vanished without a trace. Weeks later, we received a letter. She had run away with the man she loved, but she was ill, gravely ill. She begged me to protect her child if she did not survive. She said the attic held the key to everything. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. And did you find the child? Lady Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. No. By the time I reached her, she was gone. The child. I never found them. I locked the attic, hoping to preserve her memory, to keep her secret safe. But now... She trailed off, her gaze shifting to Thomas. Miss Marple followed her gaze, her sharp mind piecing. Together the clues, the pocket watch, the letter, Lady Beatrice's protectiveness. It all pointed to one conclusion. Thomas, Miss Marple said softly, do you know the date of your birth? Thomas frowned. Yes, it's November 1923. Why? Lady Beatrice let out a choked sob, her hands covering her face. Miss Marple's expression softened. Thomas, she said gently, I believe you are Lady Margaret's child. The room erupted into gasps. Thomas staggered back, his face pale. That's impossible. My parents were not your parents. Lady Beatrice interrupted, her voice breaking. I took you in, raised you as my own. I couldn't bear to tell you the truth, not after losing Margaret. I thought I was protecting you. Thomas sank into a chair, his hands trembling. All this time, you knew? Lady Beatrice nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Thomas. I never meant to hurt you. Miss Marple watched the scene unfold, her mind racing. The attic, the whispers, the missing key. It all made sense now. But there was still one piece of the puzzle missing. Lady Beatrice, she said, what happened to the key to the attic? Lady Beatrice hesitated, then reached into the pocket of her dress. She pulled out a small rusted key, its teeth broken and jagged. It broke years ago. I've kept it with me ever since, a reminder of the past I could never escape. Miss Marple took the key, examining it closely. And the noises in the night? The whispers? Lady Beatrice shook her head. I don't know. Perhaps it's Margaret trying to reach us. Chapter 8. The Hidden Letter. The drawing-room was thick with tension, the weight of Lady Beatrice's confession lingering like a storm cloud. Thomas sat in stunned silence, his hands gripping the arms of his chair as if to steady himself. Dr. Graves and Mrs. Henshaw exchanged uneasy glances, while Miss Marple remained calm, her sharp eyes scanning the room for any further clues. There's still one thing I don't understand, Miss Marple said, breaking the silence. The letter I found in the library. Lady Margaret wrote about protecting him. But if Thomas is her child, why would she refer to him as him? It seems impersonal. Lady Beatrice frowned, her tear-streaked face pale. I don't know. Margaret's letter was the last I heard from her. I assumed she meant Thomas, but... Miss Marple's gaze shifted to the broken key in her hand. Perhaps there's more to the attic than we've uncovered. Lady Beatrice, do you think it's possible that something, or someone else, is hidden there? Lady Beatrice's eyes widened. I don't know. I haven't been inside since Margaret disappeared. But if there's a chance... Thomas stood abruptly, his voice firm. Then we need to open it, now. Lady Beatrice hesitated, her hands trembling. But the key is broken. It won't turn." Miss Marple held up the key, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps not, but I noticed something earlier. The lock on the attic door is old, and the mechanism is likely worn. With a little effort, we might be able to force it open." The group exchanged uneasy glances, but no one objected. Together, they made their way to the attic, the air growing colder with each step. The door loomed before them, its warped wood and rusted lock a testament to the years it had remained sealed. Miss Marple handed the broken key to Thomas. "Try it, gently." Thomas inserted the key into the lock, his hands steady despite the tension in the room. He turned it slowly, and for a moment nothing happened. Then, with a loud click, the lock gave way. The door creaked open, revealing a room shrouded in dust and shadows. Miss Marple stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The attic was filled with the remnants of Lady Margaret's life. Paintings stacked against the walls, trunks overflowing with old clothes, and a desk covered in yellowed papers. But it was the small wooden box on the desk that caught Miss Marple's attention. She opened it carefully, revealing a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Beneath them lay a photograph. A young woman with Thomas's eyes, her arm around a man whose face was achingly familiar. Miss Marple held up the photograph, her voice soft. "Lady Beatrice, do you recognize this man?" Lady Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's Dr. Graves." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Dr. Graves. He stood frozen, his face pale and his hands clenched at his sides. "Dr. Graves," Miss Marple said, her tone calm but firm. "Would you care to explain?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a heavy sigh, he nodded. "Very well. Margaret and we were in love. But her father would never have approved. When she became pregnant, we planned to run away together. But she fell ill, and I couldn't save her." Thomas stepped forward, his voice shaking. "You're my father." Dr. Graves nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "I wanted to tell you, Thomas, but Lady Beatrice made me promise to keep it a secret. She thought it would be easier for you, not knowing the truth." Lady Beatrice sank into a chair, her face a mask of guilt and sorrow. "I thought I was doing what was best. But now I see I was wrong." Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on Thomas's shoulder. "The truth is never easy, but it's always better than living in the shadow of a lie." Thomas looked at Dr. Graves, then at Lady Beatrice, his expression a mix of anger and relief. "All this time, you both knew, and you kept it from me." Dr. Graves stepped forward, his voice pleading. "Thomas, I'm sorry. I wanted to be a part of your life, but I didn't know how. Please let me make it right." Thomas hesitated, then nodded slowly. "We have a lot to talk about." Chapter 9. The Final Revelation. The attic, once a place of secrets and shadows, now felt strangely alive as the group stood amidst the remnants of Lady Margaret's life. The photograph of her and Dr. Graves lay on the desk, its faded image, silent witness to the love and tragedy that had unfolded decades ago. Thomas stared at it, his expression a storm of emotions. Anger, confusion, and beneath it all, a flicker of hope. "Why didn't you tell me?" Thomas asked, his voice breaking as he turned to Lady Beatrice. "All these years, You let me believe I was someone else. Why? Lady Beatrice's hands trembled as she clutched her handkerchief. I thought I was protecting you, Thomas. Your mother's death, it broke me. I couldn't bear to lose you too. I thought if you knew the truth, it would only bring you pain. And what about me? Dr. Graves interjected, his voice heavy with regret. I wanted to be a father to you, Thomas, but Lady Beatrice convinced me it was better to stay away, to let you grow up without the burden of our past. Thomas shook, his head, his fists clenched at his sides. You both lied to me. My whole life I've felt like something was missing, like I didn't belong, and now I know why. Miss Marple stepped forward, her tone gentle but firm. Thomas, what they did was wrong, but it came from a place of love. Lady Beatrice and Dr. Graves were trying to protect you, even if they went about it the wrong way. The question now is, what will you do with the truth? Thomas hesitated, his gaze shifting between Lady Beatrice and Dr. Graves. For a long moment the room was silent, the weight of his decision hanging in the air. Finally he spoke, his voice steady. I need time to think, to process all of this, but I want to know everything, about my mother, about what happened, about who I really am. Lady Beatrice nodded, tears streaming down her face. Of course, Thomas. Whatever you need, I'll tell you everything. Dr. Graves stepped closer, his expression earnest. And I'll be here, Thomas, if you'll have me. Thomas didn't respond immediately, but the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. Miss Marple, sensing the fragile hope in the room, turned her attention to the letters in the wooden box. She picked up the top one, its paper brittle with age, and unfolded it carefully. Perhaps this will help, she said, handing the letter to Thomas. He read it aloud, his voice trembling at first but growing stronger as he went on. Dearest Beatrice, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Please take care of my child. Tell them about me, about the love I had for them and for their father. Don't let them grow up in the dark, not knowing where they came from. They deserve the truth, no matter how painful it may be. With all my love, Margaret Thomas's hands shook as he finished reading, his eyes glistening with tears. He looked at Lady Beatrice, then at Dr. Graves, and finally at Miss Marple. Thank you, he said quietly, for helping me find the truth. Miss Marple smiled gently. The truth has a way of coming to light, Thomas. It's up to you now to decide what to do with it. Chapter 10. The Final Confrontation. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Ashwick Manor, casting a golden glow over the drawing-room. The atmosphere, once heavy with secrets and tension, now felt lighter, as if the truth had lifted a veil from the house. Thomas sat by the fireplace, the letters from his mother spread out on the table before him. Lady Beatrice and Dr. Graves sat across from him, their expressions a mix of hope and apprehension. Miss Marple, ever the quiet observer, sat nearby, her knitting needles moving steadily as she listened. Tell me about her, Thomas said, his voice soft but firm. About my mother. Lady Beatrice took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Margaret was extraordinary. She was kind, passionate, and fiercely independent. She loved to paint, to write, to dream. But she was also stubborn, and when she set her mind to something, nothing could stop her. Dr. Graves nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. She had a way of seeing the world that was entirely her own. When we met, I was just a young doctor, new to the village. She saw something in me that no one else did. We fell in love quickly, but her father, he would never have approved. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Dr. Graves. What happened to her? How did she die? Lady Beatrice's face crumpled, but she forced herself to continue. She became ill shortly after you were born. It was sudden, and despite everything Dr. Graves did, she didn't survive. She made me promise to take care of you, to keep you safe. But I was so afraid of losing you too that I hid the truth, even from you. Thomas's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. And my father? Why didn't you tell me about him? Dr. Graves spoke up, his tone filled with regret. I wanted to, Thomas, but Lady Beatrice convinced me it was better to stay away, to let you grow up without the burden of our past. I've regretted that decision every day of my life. Thomas looked down at the letters, his fingers tracing the faded ink. All these years, I felt like something was missing, like I didn't belong. And now I know why. Miss Marple set her knitting aside and leaned forward, her tone gentle but firm. Thomas, the past cannot be changed, but the future is yours to shape. What matters now is what you choose to do with the truth. Thomas hesitated, his gaze shifting between Lady Beatrice and Dr. Graves. I don't know if I can forgive you. Not yet, but I want to try. I want to know who I am, where I come from, and I want to know both of you, not as the people who kept secrets from me, but as the people who loved my mother. Lady Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to take Thomas's hand. Thank you, Thomas. That's all I've ever wanted. Dr. Graves nodded, his expression filled with gratitude. And I'll be here, Thomas, for as long as you'll have me. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment settling over them. Miss Marple watched quietly, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She had seen many mysteries in her time, but few had touched her as deeply as this one. As the group began to talk, sharing stories of Lady Margaret and piecing together the fragments of the past, Miss Marple slipped out of the room. She walked through the halls of Ashwick Manor, her mind turning over the events of the past few days. The mystery of the locked attic had been solved, but the story was far from over. In the entrance hall she paused, her gaze falling on the portrait of Lady Margaret. The young woman's eyes seemed to meet hers, filled with a quiet sadness and a hint of hope. You can rest now, Miss Marple said softly. Your secrets are safe, and your child is in good hands.